Teraz sa posunieme ďalej do ďalšej debaty. Som veľmi rád, že mám v štúdiu, z ktorého pre vás vysielame tento ročník Dni architektúry a dizajnu, v ktorom sa spájame s vami prostredníctvom internetu. Že tu mám ďalších milých hostí a debatu, ktorú povedie Henrieta Moravčíková. Vítaj, dobrý večer.
Ďakujem, ahoj Martin.
Budeme sa rozprávať v najbližších chvíľach o Ročenke architektúry Slovenska. Inak pre mňa ako laika to znie, predstavujem si pod tým takú dobrú, veľkú, farebnú knihu plnú fotografií a plánov a schém, ale asi by si mohla ty tak na úvod povedať pár vetami, že čo by som si mal pod tým predstaviť?
Áno, aj dobre si to predstavuješ, ale okrem tých fotografií a tých plánov, tak sme sa snažili tam zaradiť aj nejakú intelektuálnu reflexiu súčasnej architektonickej scény na Slovensku. Viac v diskusii.
Určite áno. Uviedli by sme radi, totiž práve teraz novú ročinku slovenskej architektúry a teda som veľmi rád, že si priviedla aj hostí, s ktorými budeš debatovať. Je tu s nami Laura Krišteková. Dobrý večer. Monika Bočková, takisto vás vítame, dobrý večer. No a Peter Szalay do tretice za autorský tým tejto ročenky, dobrý večer.
Dobrý večer.
A máme už na linke aj zahraničného hostia, Matthias Boeckl. Are you here with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Guten Abend, willkommen. Je to pán profesor Vysokej školy výtvarných umení vo Viedni a pôsobí ako redaktor pre Architektúry aktuálnu. Aj s ním sa bude zhovárať ďalej Henrieta Moravčíková. Nech sa páči, odovzdávam ti slovo.
Ďakujem. Využijeme možno, že zložíme rúška, aby sme boli narovno s našim hosťom zahraničným a súčasne teda asi prejdeme do angličtiny, aby sme nevýhodňovali nášho koautora. Hi, Matthias. It's nice to have you here with us. Hi. So we will continue in English to understand each other better. Okay, so we would like to just explain what is the yearbook on Slovak architecture about. And actually all the people who are gathered here are authors of the yearbook, which was published recently. And we would like to somehow introduce what is the content, what are the intentions, and perhaps discuss a little bit background of preparations of the yearbook, and perhaps somehow compare the situation in Austria and in Slovakia, because Matthias is very well, established in this Austrian architecture discussion. So perhaps, Laura, you can start just to introduce what we have in our yearbook.
Okay. So the content of this book follows the content we have set up 4 years ago in the first edition of this architecture yearbook. It is important to say that it's a collective work of our team of architectural theorists. And it aims to reflect the contemporary, not just the contemporary realizations, but also the situation in our scene. So we started with the studies. First of all, we studied almost 80 realizations, which was published the last 2 years, from which we have chosen almost 30 for the personal visit. And from them, we have chosen 20 for the final selection. And to give the book more like book value, not to be just like a catalog or a journal, we were trying to rather choose less buildings, but to give them more space for text and pictures, and also supplement these texts with like a general study. Which is for us important not just from the current perspective, because it's always points on the urgent issues of our society or the architecture, but also from the long-term perspective, because it's then like several years later we can also trace the steps of development of our architecture. So this is maybe shortly.
Yes, you
about the process.
already touched some points.
Yes.
We will, I hope, touch later some topics that I would like to discuss more deeply. But let's have a look from another perspective, because as you already mentioned, we are trying to give a kind of reflection of or on the Slovak architecture scene, and we've been discussing it in a backstage that we are already in a third year of the yearbook. The first one was somehow devoted to the identity of Slovak architecture. The second one was more about planning and construction of cities. And this year is about renovation, reconstruction, which is a topic, is very relevant in architecture discussion or in the general social discussion, not only in Slovakia, but in a broader context as well. So perhaps, Peter, you can touch this topic, because we have written the core essay on this topic.
I think we didn't choose this topic just only because we are from the Department of Architecture of Historic Institute of History, but yes, it's we discovered that a lot of our objects we were already wrote in these 3 years were reconstructions and restorations. And when we researched the objects or the projects which were somehow reflected also in abroad, then we saw the most of this architecture, Slovak or successful Slovak architecture was this kind of reconstructions or renovations or somehow finding a new way how to use the old constructions. So we start to research this topic, but we saw that there is a big gap or a big difference between how architects work in these exceptional projects and how it's usual restored or reconstruct our architecture. And then we saw that the protected monuments are mostly restored in a way of somehow Las Vegas, that they do not keep the authenticity of these heritages and mostly make only kind of fashionable copies of the history, or even they choose only part of this of heritage layers, and we can see some ideological position of the authors or investors. And on other hand, the architecture which is not protected, the heritage of built environment in Slovakia is mostly perceived not by its value as a building, but a value of the land where it stands. So and we see a lot of effort to pull down this architecture and build something new. But we think, and what was maybe our message of this essay, is that in the time of global crisis, of global climate crisis, we cannot continue in this modernist way to build always something new and start from nothing, from the green place. So we want to emphasize that it's necessary to reconstruct, recycle, and find new way how to use most of the built environment which we have. And maybe this is the message what we can want
I
to
hope
show.
that the readers can discover this message inside of our essay. I would like now to give the floor to our guest from abroad. Matthias, perhaps you can introduce very briefly, or not that briefly, because we are so happy that you are here with us, that you don't need to do it briefly, to introduce what was your essay about, because I only would like to add that we are... it is very important to us to have in each of the yearbooks also a kind of reflection from abroad, not only to look at our scene from our perspective, but to have the let's say, international perspective or the foreign perspective. So perhaps you can touch a little bit what was your text about, or what is it about?
Well, I was given sort of a carte blanche to contribute to that publication, and I chose to look at the function of awards and prizes and publications that present collections of exemplary buildings, that can serve as role models. And as such, I tried to position it within the European context. And what I found out is that in general, the situation, as we heard just before now, in Slovakia is not very different from the rest of Europe. So the available building area is more or less facing a shortage already. As we heard, it's getting more and more expensive. Another aspect is that the vision of modernity, of the modern movement, to reinvent everything from scratch and start building from scratch is obviously over already, and that we have to deal much more with heritage, with refurbishment, with rebuilding, restructuring. All these aspects are evident, as well as in Slovakia, as well as in the rest of Europe, and also in Austria, where I come from and where I'm working. We are facing very similar problems, and my impression of your selection was somehow very familiar for me, because I had the impression that you selected many examples that serve the good life, so to speak. So there is a lot about housing, there is a lot about education, not so much about industry and fabrication, and that gave me the clue to develop sort of a hypothesis that this annual collection also is, of course, sort of a snapshot of a certain societal development. Where does society stand now? What are its major building issues? Analyzing the Slovak production from that point of perspective gives me the impression that life is not so bad in your country, and it's constantly improving. And you are dealing in a very decent and a very subtle way with traditions, especially with the modern tradition, in a better way than in Austria, actually. So I can only congratulate you.
Well, after these words, I would say that we've been not very serious in our work, because we are quite sure that this is just the opposite we are facing here in our country. But in your text, you touched also a kind of position of yearbooks and similar publications and architectural discussions. So perhaps we can discuss a little bit a kind of relation between yearbook, architecture journal, perhaps architecture history. Are there differences? And when we talk about yearbook, do we need something like an architecture yearbook? What do you think?
We need all possible publications about architecture that we can get. So what we need is to spread out the message, and we have to select the media that can serve this purpose. And we should take opportunity of all channels that we get, digital channels, printed channels, etc. And as for the type, the print publication type of a yearbook, this is something that was familiar several decades ago. It got a little bit out of fashion meanwhile, but in certain countries and in certain areas, there is sort of a renaissance of those yearbooks. They can also be used, by the way, as a commercial tool. And the point of yearbooks is sort of a harvest of the quality production of a certain area and a certain time, and that definitely makes sense if you are establishing some sort of continuity, which means that you can compare the years and develop a sort of a tradition, and this would enable everyone to actually watch very closely the development of the architectural scene in the given country or in the given region. Another important aspect is that it is an experts media, more or less. I don't know the print run that you have, but all those yearbooks and specialized magazine titles, etc., usually are not spread out in huge numbers. So what we all have to pursue is to get out of our ghetto, so to speak, and to bring the architecture discourse into the mass media. Which is not so easy. I don't know the situation in Slovakia, but we in Austria, for example, we do not have certain devoted pages or columns in large newspapers to the architectural debate, which was not always like that. 100 years ago, there were many dailies and weekly magazines that discussed architecture very intensely. So it's a bit difficult, more difficult now. We do have certain pages, devoted pages, once a week in two major daily papers, in Der Standard and Die Presse, and also in some of the regional papers. But the print run of those titles is not very big. So the largest papers do not have that. And if you are looking at other media like television, radio, etc., there is no weekly television broadcast about architectural questions. There had been some efforts to establish that, but they never succeeded. So these series never got beyond, I don't know, like 5 or 10 sequels, and then they were cancelled again. And in radio, it's similar, a little bit better, but currently we do not have anything on the radio. So that's the real problem. Within our experts or architectural community, we welcome all types of publications of quality architecture, and we can go on congratulate ourselves how good we are, but what does it move? So how do we get beyond our ghetto? That's the real task.
Yeah, I mean, you touched exactly the core of the problem, and yes, this was perhaps an idea that was behind our intention when we started with the yearbook, to come out of our elephant tower and or our tower and go near to the public audience, but. As you mentioned that the yearbook might be seen as a kind of a little bit old-fashioned project. So I would like to touch this topic because we have among us a new colleague, a new author, which is Monica is only, like she's with us only in this yearbook, like for the first time. So you are the youngest among us. So do you feel that the yearbook is a kind of old-fashioned story, or what is your position?
Well, as you said, this was my first time that I have collaborated with you on this yearbook, and but also when I noticed the previous publications, the previous yearbooks, I was always convinced that there is big need for such a publication, and somebody might see it as something old-fashioned, but just when we think that. As Matthias just said, that it's also a gesture towards public, because there is no such a resume that would select the let's say the tip of the iceberg and presents the works of the highest quality with the critical introduction and also the explanation of the wider context. So, yes, of course, we do have the different prizes for architecture, and the winners get publicated. We have the magazines for architecture, but if somebody is not following regularly the architectural scene, I think it's much easier for them to just reach out for the summary that covers the most important and influential works. So I see this as very exactly the step towards the wider public. And if we can discuss the format, which is a typical printed book, and maybe in these times of different media, this can sound old-fashioned to somebody. But I was also thinking about this, that maybe it's also something that will be helpful for the future generations, because we don't know how media will develop in the future, and I'm just guessing that when somebody in 50 years will be wondering about how was the Slovak architecture in 2000, then I believe that a book that's a yearbook of architecture will be still preserved and archived somewhere, but maybe all the online articles.
This is so lovely, because you are speaking from the position of architecture historian who
Exactly.
would like to find these books
Exactly.
in tens of years in some kind of archive.
Because we all know how helpful this would be for us if there would be like yearbooks from 80s or something. And we all know that. And I'm just wondering that if all the online articles or even video that we're recording right now, if it will be accessible for somebody in the future. So I hope, and it's something that I would really like, if this would be still reachable also for the future generations, and to give the wider context of the scene.
So this is the reason why you are with us, because you would like to influence the future generations.
No, not at all.
I was just kidding.
I'm with you because I'm enjoying this research, and Matthias was so kind because he said that our scene is even more sophisticated when treating the monuments or the architecture from the 20th century, but that's unfortunately not true. And we have to say that these are only selected works that we find the best ones in terms of their approach to the existing and very caring and sensitive, and still bringing new layers of architecture to the existing ones, but that is not the general, as you say, Baukultur. So,
yes, and also we must say that it is important maybe to say that first of all, our first idea was to make this yearbook every year, but then we found out that we are not able to provide like really high quality amount or selection of architecture pieces like every year. So on one side we are happy that it seems that all the architecture in Slovakia is so lovely, but on the other hand we cannot forget that how are the numbers, which is the number like published in the yearbook, comparing with the general number of
everything that was built,
everything
in
that
those
was
2
built
years.
or reconstructed or somehow adapted in last years.
Yeah, perhaps it somehow also included this kind of tension inside of the book, because the first part is always about this critical reflection that you can see and you can read what was actually done and not in the right way, and then you can see the good examples that show how it should have been done. So this is perhaps also something which is exceptional, and it's not possible to include it in a monthly, which is like it must be very actual, very up to date. And we have, when we are speaking about this kind of book, we have 2 years to more relaxed, like research deeply in this topic. But Matthias, when you touched the topic about the presence of architecture in our media or in your media in Austria, and when we compare it with Slovakia, right now, then we will be really much better than you, because we have now the festival, the Days of Architecture and Design. We have just finished one series of like movies on modern architecture in our how you call it, radio and television, Slovak radio and television, and we have a special edition on architecture in one of the dailies. So we are very lucky, like in these days, but then generally we have no reflections of architecture in our media, so it's even worse than in Austria. So I don't want to complain, but it's like this.
What do you want?
Yeah,
but let me add something about the old-fashionedness of printed books. I have to correct that I'm a big fan of old-fashioned things, and I would like to preserve them. And what you mentioned before, that we are not too sure about the digital formats of the future, what actually will be still consumable, or if we still have the habits to consume that. The book has proved for many thousand years that it works, and it still will work another 1,000 years at least. So it definitely does make sense to print books. And another aspect is the craft aspect. Our culture tends to produce trash, a lot of trash, digital trash mainly, but also printed trash. So if we have the privilege to produce a finely crafted book with good graphic design, good paper, good photographs, plans, etc., then we should feel very lucky. And that is a possibility also to demonstrate the value of architecture. So it does definitely make sense to produce beautiful books about not only beautiful, but also social, functional, and ecologically responsible buildings in the best possible and representative way. And even if they are only used as coffee table books, that still makes a lot of sense, because those people who use it as a coffee table book probably, or potentially at least, also the owners of houses and people who might commission an architect to do a remodeling or build a new house, etc. So we need a double strategy. We need to produce high-value media, also expensive if you want, and also broad media. And that's the point. The digital strategies can be really used in a good way, I think. In my magazine, we are starting to collect experiences with the so-called social media that are sometimes anti-social media, but in our case, of course, not. And for example, well, Facebook is already old-fashioned, I dare to say. But Instagram, for example, that is very successful. And it gives us a lot to think about the mediation of content and thinking about cultural values and especially architecture. Because Instagram is, as you know, a strictly visual media. And what you can see there is one image or maximum 3 images. And that's the way it works. People are clicking on the images. They look at the images, but they are not interested in any debate. Either they like it or they don't like it. And you can measure it if you get 300, 3,000 or 300,000 likes. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we have to develop strategies to mediate true architectural values through the very thin channel of one single image. And that's a real challenge, I might say. And what we also observed is that there actually is something like a certain media-specific aesthetics. Because I discussed with my colleague who selects the images of our Instagram account and asked her which are the ones that are liked most and what do you think why they are liked most. And what she said is, well, it's quite simple. It's reduced structures. It's simple geometric elements. So it's something that can be grasped with one view, and everything that's complex or differentiated does not work as well. So are we living in the tyranny of the images, or can we use these aesthetic laws of those media in the sense of improving Baukultur? And the work by Marshall McLuhan is still very true. The media is the message, but we can turn it around. We can use it also to distribute our messages. So maybe the message is the media.
Yeah, you touched so many ideas, but I would like to go back to 2 of them. First, that we forgot to mention the publisher of our yearbook, which is the publisher house Slovart. And I must say that we are quite lucky that we found a publisher who was prepared to go and invest in such a project, because it's not a specialized publisher in architecture books, but like in general. So we are lucky to have this kind of support, because such a publisher can distribute the yearbook exactly to this type of audience, which is not only professionals, but also a broad public. You can find it in the shelves of nearly each bookstore, which is good. On the other hand, of course, we are a little bit like running against the stream of simplification, because as you can see, the cover is quite complex and not easy to to discover, and the content is also not so easy to be understand in a very, how to say, short way. But okay, this is perhaps also a little bit old-fashioned, and we are developing our own stream. But I would like to say a short, well, it's a joke actually, or a short story, because as you mentioned, the coffee tables. So I have a nice experience in a very prominent, very, how to say, exclusive office. When I visited the office, I saw our yearbook on the coffee table. And the reason was very simple, because one of the clients is an architect, and they opened the yearbook on the work of that architect, and they have been very proud that they have such a connection with let's say the top of Slovak architecture. So it really works, and I do hope that there will be many coffee tables around Slovakia with our yearbook lying on them, not only as a decoration but also as a kind of inspiration, as you put it before. But perhaps you can, yeah.
I think Matthias was also referring to the, we must admit, attractive look and the design of the book, because that's what he mentioned, that also like really nice photographs and nice quality presentation of the architecture. But at the same time, we are still touching the topic of simplification of the debate, because that is something that is disturbing to me as well, that often we discuss the architecture just in the terms of its aesthetics, and those are exactly the images that you mentioned that are so popular on social media, because it's like one strong image can have a lot of response in the wider public, and that is something that we are also going against the current, because all of the works that we selected have not only let's say a description of the facade or new materials or the attractiveness, but they always contain very reasonable and critical reason for why we selected that building, that work. So this also, it's an attempt to wider the debate about architecture, and to remember that we are not talking just about nice images, but we are still talking about the work that has its meaning and its impact, and it's perhaps exactly as you wrote in your essay, it's a work for community, for public space. There are so many different things that we can discuss about architecture other than just nice facades.
Yeah, I agree completely. Of course, architecture is not only a question of nice images and nice facades, but as we are living in a world of images, we have to deal with that fact, and we have to make use of it somehow. And as I mentioned, use the image as a channel to mediate also other things, and not only the image, but also, as I mentioned, the craft quality of things. So, as Henrietta said, if you are crafting a real fine book, a beautiful book, then you will find it on coffee tables in one or the other elegant ambiente, and that makes sense. So it opens a door, and people can enter it, and at that point, of course, it's important if they enter the room of architecture, the readers, then they should find also serious information beyond the images. So, we have to get people interested. We have to use those media as a bait, maybe, and seduce them.
This was a kind of conclusion, but we still have. Yeah,
that's
please.
what we are doing.
Exactly.
No, but I want just mention something about from our kitchen, because there were a big discussion about this yearbook, about the cover of if it's enough interesting, or if it's could enough attract the people in the bookstores. Yes, so there will a little bit fight about how it will look like, but it didn't change a lot, we can say. But I'm also happy that even that it's look luxury, maybe it's not so luxury, that the price is not so high, so the people can buy it, and it's necessary. And also the luxury that the publisher cover all the costs, so we don't have to find another ways on and advertisement, and so that it's some way we are free from kind of influence of this construction business, and so which is, I think, very important also to be critical and show the our interpretation of the scene, because of course we are not the gods who have this grand goût to say this is only the. I think it's always the interpretation, what is good and what is the quality.
Yeah, but you touched really an important point. I mean, this kind of when you are not how to say in kind of position that you need to reflect the lobbyists around you, and then you can really decide what you are thinking about, what content it will be, and it's really like a result of a research and not reflection of a contemporary state of the construction market, let's say. Which sometimes happen, and then Matthias, you know a lot about this problem, because you are editor-in-chief of the Architektúry aktuálnu journal for years, so you know how it is difficult to sometimes deal with this kind of pressures around you. So we are very lucky that there is no pressure around us, which is also very exceptional. We cannot hear you right now, so perhaps.
Do you want me to say something about our relations with the industry?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, there are many prejudices involved, unfortunately, from both sides, from the intelligentsia on the one hand, and from the industry on the other hand. I have sometimes the impression that parts of the intelligentsia consider the industry as a natural enemy, and on the other hand, I have the impression that some representatives of the industry, manufacturing industry, building industry, etc., consider media only as a sort of loudspeaker or advertisement media for their own messages and for the improvement of their sales figures. Both is, of course, wrong, and both is unintelligent. And the question is, how can we make that relation intelligent? And my impression is that the representatives of innovative industries, top down from the owners to the technicians and the salespeople, are actually interested in a debate, also, and even in a critical debate. I think it's, again, an old-fashioned way to look at things, to believe that the industry only wants to communicate the quality of their own products. I think we are all living in sophisticated industrial and consumer societies, and people are not that stupid anymore, simply. We are all fed up with advertisements of all kinds, and I dare say that in Central Europe we also have a certain level of a critical consumer society. So it's not so easy anymore to sell things in the traditional primitive way. And that's why many producers, many industrial endeavors are not using traditional advertisement anymore, like buying pages in magazines and things like that. And they shift to different strategies of communication, and sometimes they edit their own media. Sometimes they are hosting debates, events of all kinds. Sometimes they are sponsoring like events at the Biennale in Venice, etc., etc. And my experience is that also the consumer accepts and appreciates actually the comparison and the free or at least attempted objective debate of the advantages of certain products. So several years ago, you couldn't print a report about a new technology, like in furniture production, for example, or in lighting devices, and publish another report about the product of the same industry, but from a different producer on 2 double pages, for example. But that has changed meanwhile. Meanwhile, producers are actually interested in that kind of competition because they are embedded then in a sort of community. And what we as a media need to provide is this stage, this house, so to speak, where all these stakeholders can communicate with each other. And then it's not primitive advertisement anymore. And on the other hand, the consumer or the architects or whoever can contribute to those kinds of debates. So to sum it up, the dependencies are there, of course. There is no such thing as an independent media because whatever media you are producing, somebody has to pay for it. And if it's not the reader or the consumers who are used to consume their media for free meanwhile, then someone else must pay. If it's not the government via subsidies, which is usually the case in our field of work, then it has to be someone else, and that's usually the industry or even developers themselves. But in that sense, you are never independent, but you are not dependent on the message of your sponsors. That's very important to say. We need money, but if we use it in an intelligent way, we can decide ourselves what we use it for, and that's also appreciated. At least that's our experience in our magazine. And I'm sure that the development of all media in the cultural field will, over short or long, go in that direction.
Yeah, it's a quite interesting how you put it, because actually I was now thinking about the history and about the position of the industry and the advertisement in the old magazines from 20s, 30s, and I cannot imagine our research in architecture history without these advertisements, because we are now familiar with the way how they were thinking about technologies and about all these innovations because of this advertising, actually. So, I mean, as you put it, an architecture magazine cannot exist without this contact with the industry, and it's only exactly. Let's hope that we have already this wave of this primitivism behind us, and now we are again, because I would say that in the 20s or in the 30s, it was really a very intelligent way how they were able to combine these informations on up-to-date technologies with up-to-date architecture. And I hope we are again somehow reaching this kind of intelligent way to communicate. Let's hope. It would be a good message for architects and then for the representatives of the industry as well. But I mean, we are reaching to the end of the debate, so I wanted to touch the last topic, which was, I know perhaps it's impossible to have it in 5 minutes, but comparing the Slovak and the Austrian architecture scene, it's very, very complicated. But perhaps we can touch only the situation in the printed media. Perhaps the situation, how it is when we're comparing journals on architecture and books on architecture that are published in both of our environments, because we do have, let's say, 3 journals devoted to architecture in our country. One on research on architecture, but I would say that's it. The situation in Austria, we have your excellent journal, and then we have some kind of let's say, more specialized journals on research, and perhaps, am I wrong? Do we have more of them? I don't think so.
Well, basically there are many magazines and journals, but most of them are really very small, and not all of them are circulated all over the country. Some of them are regional media. The national ones are mainly 3 or 4. That's our magazine, Architektúry. Then there is one specialized magazine about competitions. Then there is a 3rd magazine that's specializing in the building process and makes reports about structural questions, etc. And there is another one that doesn't even employ any writers and just prints architects and industries information and circulates that for free to all architectural offices. So that's also a kind to produce media, but not a very high quality one. And then there are, as I mentioned, many regional printed titles, like from the chambers of civil engineers and architects. They are producing their own media. We do have 3 of them in Austria, and one national one who runs its own media again, or meanwhile has stopped it and then starts again. So the chambers, which are the official organizations of civil engineers and architects, they do not have a certain media strategy, and that's no surprise because they are run by architects and they are very individualistic. And it depends on who is the current president of the architect chamber, if they decide to produce another magazine or not. But that's not a serious media strategy, and it changes every 3 or 4 years. So if you ask me, I'm not touching now the digital media, the online platforms. There are several ones, but if your question was aimed at the question, do we have enough or don't we have enough? It's hard to decide. It's a lot, and they are read and they are consumed to a certain extent. But I think there will be a consolidation process, like in all industries. And currently, one of the other magazines tends to be closed in the near future. So my guess is that we will not increase the titles, printed and digital, but rather concentrate. And that's a process that's going on all over Europe, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly what we have behind this kind of development when the journals were like growing, and each month there was a new journal on architecture in countries around Europe, which was perhaps in 90s. And now we are facing the situation which is just a contrast. Unfortunately, we do not have time to discuss this topic deeply. I'm very sorry about this, because our time is running. We have 30 seconds left. So, Matthias, I would like to thank you very, very much for being with us. The only pity is that it was not possible physically, but only like digital way. So I do hope that you will come to Bratislava soon in a better times. And so thank you.
Next time we are doing it in person, of course, and that Corona shit will pass, I guess. It will be over soon. And thank you very much for the invitation, and have a nice evening.
Thank you, and I would like also thanks my colleagues for collaboration on this great project, and you, our dear audience, for attention. And please buy the book.
Ďakujeme veľmi pekne. A jednu mi tu nechajte, ale ja si ju tiež chcem prelistovať. Sure. Henrieta Moravčíková, a teda, ak dovolíš, predstavím ešte a opäť spomeniem mená tvojich hostí. Boli tu s nami Laura Krišteková, ďakujeme pekne. Monika Bočková, vďaka a pekný večer aj vám. Peter Szalay, samozrejme Henrieta patrí do týmu, ktorí pripravili túto skvelú Ročenku architektúry. Ďakujeme za debatu.
My ďakujeme.
A naozaj teda mimoriadne témy a mnohé témy otvorili počas tohto dnešného rozprávania. Tešíme sa, že aj táto diskusia zaznela na Dňoch architektúry a dizajnu.